Welcome, everyone, to the Captive Audience. It is the 25th of June, a Tuesday. I'm Kevin Horn. I'm here with one of our regular co hosts who's able to join us here tonight, Stephen Lloyd, Young Republican State Chairman. Stephen, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invite tonight.
And just wanted to say a quick word. Please pray for David Darnell and his family, his wife Karen, and their kids. David's very ill, and he hasn't been on the show since January, and he's been fighting, ever since then against this real dangerous cancer. And prayer makes a difference, and it also brings the Lord's healing, and both are needed. So please pray for him. Please pray for his family. And if we hear anything, we will make sure that we let you guys know what's happening. So he is definitely one of the people that, when we think of the last, 10 to 15 years of the state party, David has been one of these ever-present warriors battling for the conservative cause. And he... we certainly miss him being one of the co-founders of this show, but also just that sense of humor. It's I think that I don't know who laughs harder, the people watching or me when I'm on with David, because he's hilarious. One of the funniest things he ever said was he was describing Eugene, Oregon. He said that's the place where the Marxists go to lay their eggs. And we got so many great comments back. I still use that. I just told that to somebody the other day, and that just gives you a little taste of David's sense of humor. Which we do this show, we have to laugh or we'll cry at all this stuff that's going on out there. So anyway, let's launch into it and tell people what's happening, and share that opinion they can't get anywhere else. Why don't we start out with some national news? It looks like two of the Biden laptop letter signers, the ones who signed that letter and said, "Hey, this laptop is a Russian disinformation fake, the Hunter Biden laptop, which is completely false, and on it is the information they were trying to hide through the presidential election. And it wasn't to protect Hunter. It was to protect Joe Biden and win the election, which worked. And it turned out not only to be completely false that it was a Russian disinformation, but it turned out that the laptop's completely true. It's real. It's been used in a court case, which led to the conviction of Hunter Biden. But two of these people that signed the laptop letters were CIA contractors. And the people, the top people in the CIA at that time, one of whom was the CIA director, Gina Haspel, who was technically reporting to President Trump, and other CIA officials knew that the publication of this letter was coming and didn't say anything, and didn't intervene when people who were contractors at the CIA were in fact signing this letter. And of course, the first thing that you do if you hear something like this going on and you're in the CIA is you would know if this is actually, if there was any evidence supporting the fact that this is Russian disinformation or a Russian influence operation. You would know if someone was inventing this. That would be the first thing you would do, is say, is this true or not? CIA director would ask that, right? And then, of course, if this information is being put out there falsely, one of the things you would do is you would also tell the president of the United States. Because if someone was trying to engage in interference in the election, and then someone else was telling people that it was true, but then it turned out to be false, everybody should know, but especially the president. And one of the two signatories were Morell. Is it? I forget his first name. Michael Morell, former CIA director, and also former CIA Inspector General David Buckley. They were actually on the CIA's payroll as contractors at the time of the signing of the letter. I don't know. How do these guys hold on to top secret clearances? How are they not potentially facing charges for, you know, claiming to have knowledge that they didn't from their experience at the CIA? That's what they did. If I had a top secret clearance and then I went and claimed something was true that was false, predicated on the fact that I have a top secret clearance, so therefore I'm speaking with authority, there's got to be some criminal consequence for that. Certainly losing your top secret clearance would be the start of it.
Well, I think it's very interesting. The Central Intelligence Agency, if they're willing to come out here and speak to these things, my question is if they were using their security clearance in order to basis whether they believed that this was true or false, I think that's completely inappropriate. I think that if you were in a position in the United States Air Force or armed services and you used your position of authority, your position of trust in order to break something publicly like this, you would instantaneously lose your security clearance. So much so as if you moved a, if you have knowledge of a document that is coded, classified or secret, and you move it from one place to another inappropriately, you'd lose your clearance. Um, these types of issues, it seems like it doesn't affect once you get to a certain level. There's a that ceiling where people are just not held accountable, and I think it should be quite the opposite. The more understanding, the more knowledge that you have, the more you should be held accountable. And as a Republican, as your young Republican, I want to see more accountability when it comes to government, right, left, center, especially when it comes to our spy masters. If they're getting involved in our political system, or they're using their political, or they're using their position in our intelligence agency to push a political narrative, or using their position in order to launch political attacks against people that they don't agree with, that is a huge problem that I have. This is not the CIA's purview in order to get into our realm of internal politics. I
On
think
the
that
CIA, the damage to the CIA itself is incalculable. The entire intelligence uh, um, uh, agency sphere looks like it's just being weaponized for political purposes. As soon as they cross that line,
yeah,
then, and what did Chuck Schumer once say? They'll get you 6 ways to Sunday
yep.
if you cross them. Well, that's interesting because he predicted that, and that is what happened. And you know what? The CIA doesn't report. We don't report to the CIA. The CIA reports through its elected representatives to the people of the United States. So how are we going to fix this?
Well, and this is my biggest problem with this apparatus. Not only the CIA, but there are so many levels of unelected people within our government that are using their position in order to launch political attacks. Whether it's our legislative or whether it's our judicial branch, right? How many court cases are against President Trump right now? I mean,
Yeah.
how many, like, when it comes to this Biden laptop, I can't remember if they called it one of the October surprises or whatever, but for any other president, for any other situation, this would have absolutely sunk uh, the candidate that this had ramifications for. But it's not even scratching the surface when we're talking about a lousy gun charge. There are so many things that are on that laptop that we have knowledge of that have been leaked to the internet that they're not even talking about. And what I'm afraid of is they'll run the time clock out and people will not be held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, that is really why so much of this is happening and why it keeps happening is that it would appear that if you are not held accountable for your actions, then people take that as a message. keep doing it. It's just fine.
Yeah.
And so I'm with you on that. So, here's kind of a follow on to that. So there's a ghostwriter for Joe Biden's biography. And this guy, his name is Mark Zwanitzer. And, and a ghostwriter, I don't know who's the ghostwriter or Joe Biden, the near ghost-like president. But he has in his possession recordings of interviews with Biden in which the former vice president allegedly made reference to classified information. And remember how Joe Biden, they said, well, he is an old man with a poor memory, which is not what should line up very well with qualifying to be president of the United States, commander of the free world, in charge of thousands of nuclear weapons, and life and death decisions, and it's an old man with poor memory. This guy has recordings that are essentially placing Joe Biden not only in a level of awareness at the time that he had this classified information, but kind of brags about it. Really, this guy has refused to produce any of the requested documents or materials, as if he is some kind of that he has some kind of special executive privilege by himself. So he's being held in contempt, or potentially he will be held in contempt, that by the Republican Congress. And he's not the only one being held in contempt right now, because don't forget, there's also a recording to which the public has every right, and Joe Biden has no executive privilege right, that of Joe Biden's interview with the special prosecutor Hur, who said that Joe Biden is an old man with poor memory, and therefore, even though he did all these things that you would have to do to face charges analogous to what they're trying to do to charge President Trump with, and of course President Trump was the president, right? So he actually did have the right to have these materials at one point in time, and that was simply a process of returning them, I guess, eventually to the Library of Congress. Joe Biden took these materials when he had no such right. When, as a U.S. Senator, chairman of the, I think it was the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate, and also Joe Biden was the vice president, also did not have the right to go and simply decide on his own to take into his personal possession classified materials. And they said, well, he's not going to face any charges because the assessment made by Special Prosecutor Hur of this interview was that Joe Biden would not get convicted because people would say, well, he's old and can't remember stuff. So he didn't, and apparently intent is one of the things you have to prove. Well, there's a written transcript of this, but people rightly don't trust the written transcript. It has been edited. They say just to take out ums and ahs. I don't know why you have to take out ums and ahs from a written transcript. It's just a little bit longer and you just read the whole thing. But the actual audio, the American people have a right to hear that. The Congress certainly has a right to evaluate it relative to the written transcript. And in advance of a presidential election, it seems like, a material set of facts that we should be able to consider. And so Attorney General Garland is going to be held in contempt. Representative Luna, she has said that she is going to plan to force a House vote on Friday to hold Merrick Garland in what's called inherent contempt, which would require the House Sergeant at Arms to arrest Merrick Garland, which I think should happen. But that, and they have not used this. There has not been a vote like this in close to a century, but there's never been a situation where you had an attorney general just blithely committing a contempt for blatantly political purposes.
excuse me. Uh, and with that, we're living in unprecedented times because you can see across every part of our government, like the Supreme Court, their rulings are being completely disregarded when it comes to basically everything that's come out about the 2A rulings that they have. States like New York and California completely disregarding them. You see the way that there is so much contempt for all of our elected leaders across the board. I mean, it just seems like there needs to be a reckoning in our country where we respect the rule of law. If you are in office and you hold it, you're going to be accountable till you leave that office, and you're going to be accountable for all of the things that you've done. And it's really unacceptable if the Democrats think that it's okay for them to say that Joe Biden can't be held responsible for the crimes that he committed while he was in office because of his age or his mental capacity or whatever. Why don't you think the same thing that could be said for Donald Trump? The same thing that, I mean, my thing is, let's get rid of loopholes. Let's get rid of these made up artificial political workarounds, and let's just start holding people accountable for the things that they do. I can't. The world that we're living in right now is so untenable, and it really shows how desperate people are to worm their way out of being accountable. And we have to straighten this out, and it's our responsibility as the American people to really hold our representatives, and not leaders, our representatives, to account.
Yeah, and these institutions like the Congress, the Supreme Court, that whole system was set up
Mm-hmm.
to offer checks and balances, to make it so that there wasn't that the only time you could that it wasn't the only time that you could hold somebody to account was at the ballot box. You're supposed to be able to get access to information, petition your government. This government actually had to listen to what was being said, seek accountability and transparency, and then root out the issues that exist, at least in fear of what would happen at the ballot box. But what they found a way to do is to make it so that they just, along with the running interference by the media, which is another institution that's failed and needs to be thoroughly replaced in the way that it can be, which is by us choosing different media than what we've been getting.
Mm-hmm.
But they actually find a way to run out the clock.
Yeah.
And hide information long enough so that people won't receive it in time. And all these stories are an example. They won't receive it in time so that the American people can make their decision when the ballot box opportunity comes.
And this is an important a key for all of this. We have a right to redress our elected leaders. We absolutely 100% do. They are accountable to us, and I think that actually, if you want to hold them accountable, you need to call them, you need to write them, you need to go to their office, and you need to set up an appointment to say, I have a bone to pick, and you need to. I really feel like we need to hold our elected leaders accountable for the things that they do. You do it respectfully, you do it tactfully, but ultimately, I think that scheduling an appointment with your elected leaders is far more effective than going out and protesting and holding up a nonsensical sign in the street. They need to know that there are a lot of people that are organized and who are eloquent and tactful, and they need to see that we're paying attention. The American people are not going to just blindly go by and allow them to keep doing what they're doing. And eventually they're going to see that they need to either change their ways or they're going to be replaced.
Yeah, and also we need to restore these checks and balances, because
Absolutely.
if we don't have those things, then everything hinges on a high stakes presidential election where we're essentially electing an unaccountable dictator
Mm-hmm.
whose appointees can simply go and spend years doing whatever they want and running interference for him and hiding information from both Congress and the American people. And then, frankly, interfering with, defrauding our Article 3 judges and the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
And then, of course, when those judges come under threat, doing nothing to protect them,
Right.
it really is a complete breakdown in the system. And the only way to fix this ultimately is for those checks and balances to be restored. You can make your members of Congress aware of this, but you also have to make your fellow citizens aware of this, so that when it comes time to go to the ballot box, it's not some secret. And here's another example of something they are terming to be from the Deep State Diaries. They There is a entity that Department of Homeland Security started, which they've since abandoned, and it rendered an evaluation that that Trump supporters, military members, and religious people were more likely to be domestic terrorists. It was the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. And of course, that Star Chamber is not accountable to anybody. But it was bad enough that they realized that they couldn't pull that one off without causing themselves potential electoral jeopardy. Well, this is why in this election, a lot hinges on the outcome of the presidential race. Is if it's Joe Biden, or whoever they replace Joe Biden with potentially, they will be able to do this stuff with impunity. And we just saw how Congress seems to be toothless to stop it. Or maybe Congress isn't toothless, but they need the resolve to say absolutely not. Congress doesn't have to go and say, just because somebody won the presidential election, that it's time to abandon the duties and responsibilities that Congress has to oversight and to potentially defund and impeach the people that disrupt this whole system that we were just describing as breaking down.
Hmm. Well, and I think that's the most important thing that we've seen really is I feel like for a very long time our entire government has been eroded down to where they're constantly at each other's throats. Trust is at an all-time low when it comes to the Supreme Court and to our legislators and congressmen. It's just it like our executive, the executive branch of our government is literally a laughing stock internationally. Our diplomats worldwide, like because America is where we're at right now, our enemies have become so emboldened, and it makes our entire world much much more dangerous. And if we really want a good future for our children or our families or for our country as a whole, we need to be a strong country that is firm in our foundation and in our resolve, and that right there would stabilize the rest of the world. Russia wouldn't be pulling their nonsense. China wouldn't be pulling their nonsense. North Korea, the whole mess. It would never happen when we have an administration that's willing to stand up and do what they say that they're willing to do. And it's just the whole system just feels eroded and depressed, and I cannot wait till we bring it back to what it needs to be.
Well, and Congressman Burchett, who is Tim Burchett is a Republican from Tennessee, suggests that that if, and as we've said, when former President Trump gets elected and back into office, he should go after the federal agencies. He said, analogous to when General Ulysses S. Grant attacked Richmond, Virginia during the Civil War. He says they should go through these departments like Grant through Richmond. You can look it up. Grant during the Civil War just went through Richmond pretty brutally.
Yeah.
I think the analogy here is, of course, that it's not going to be enough just to remove the heads of these departments. Burchett says, I think he needs to dismantle them. And actually, if the only way to fix them is to dismantle them piece by piece, rather than sitting there and letting a long, drawn out 4-year process, leaks and underground resistance to the rule of the president that's been elected over the executive branch, then yeah, who can argue with this? The Tennessee congressman said many Americans don't trust the three-letter agencies in Washington, D.C. because of how political they become. This is exactly what we just said.
Yep. Well, and whenever, as I hear you say that, I don't typically look to South American leaders for leadership, but there's that one gentleman. Is it not Argentina?
Argentina, yeah.
It's Argentina, where he's literally ripping government agencies off of a board, and he's just throwing them to the ground.
So this one gone.
Yeah.
This one gone.
And
yeah.
I just think that that's what we need. Is we need somebody to just say, you know what, this is the Bureau of Nonsensical Nonsense, and this one's the Bureau of Finger Puppets and Fun Times, and this one is that, there are so many government agencies that are out there, and I think it was Ron Paul, and then maybe he handed off to his son Rand Paul, where every single year they go through and they go through, and I think it's like an hour long of them going, or I'm sorry, several hours long of them going through like all the nonsense spending that's going on in our government, and that's a excellent good start. But we should be doing that to agencies and not just government programs. There are so many things that hurt us in general instead of helping the American people.
Well, and there might be some well-intentioned programs, but being executed by these government agencies.
Well,
I'm sure there's some good people in these agencies, but now when you can't separate the good from the bad, you have to tear it down and start all over. And here's a great example. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declares gun violence a public health crisis. He also called for a ban on assault weapons and civilian use of large capacity magazines. There is not a epidemic of assault weapon violence in this country. There's actually no evidence of that. There was actually more in the past, and this guy thinks it's his job to declare gun violence as if where he's really saying it's the guns that are causing the violence. When you know what causes violence? Violent people known as criminals who don't follow laws and will not be disarmed by a surgeon general virtue signaling about gun possession when he doesn't take into account two things. One, that the overwhelming percentage of people who possess firearms, 99.99%, possess them, and nobody gets hurt with them, except criminals who try to go rob people. And then the other thing is, there's a Second Amendment which says it's not this guy's damn job. It is not his job to decide whether or not people have some right or not to possess firearms. And this is a guy who's completely misdiagnosed the problem. What we have is a problem with recidivist criminals who in many states, particularly states and cities controlled by and run by Democrats, blue states and blue cities, where the crime is off the charts because they don't arrest and put them away. They let them go. And those same people go out and commit more crimes. And it's being done in many cases by district attorneys funded by George Soros, who actually think that the criminal's the victim and have to be let back out so they can victimize actual real crime victims. This guy doesn't have anything to say about that, apparently. He doesn't give a crap about crime victims. He only wants to virtue signal for a political issue, which isn't his job. The U.S. Surgeon General office, like the guy in Argentina, gone. We don't need it. You did your job once on smoking with your warning, and now you're done. Out of here.
Here's the problem. I think it's so much more insidious than this, Kevin, is when the Surgeon General puts his name on something, typically it holds quite a bit of weight. Like when you see the Surgeon General's warning on the packets of cigarettes or the alcohol and everything like that, there is a cost to that. And what I'm afraid of is that eventually what's going to happen, Kevin, is when you go to work and you are filling out your employee health insurance, they're going to ask you on there straight away. They're going to say, is there firearms in the home? And if they did something along those lines, they say, unfortunately, you're 25% more likely to have gun violence in your home, and you're going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and just deny you for this health insurance because you're part of the other. You're the star belly sneeches. You're going to be a part of the other class. And I really do feel like the Surgeon General, by him putting his name on this, we have seen things like this happen in history before. And I genuinely think that this is far more dangerous than what we're seeing at it right now. Anytime that a doctor in a position of authority is telling you that one of your constitutionally protected rights is a problem, I tend to believe that it's that doctor who's a problem. And with that being said, I'd like to get a second opinion, Doc.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we're going to get a second opinion in the fall in the presidential election, but I think that once he started doing this, the Surgeon General, he actually was destroying the credibility of the Surgeon General on other issues which people legitimately may have benefited from, such as we talked about cigarette smoking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Surgeon General is destroying the credibility of the Surgeon General. By the time this office is removed, and perhaps another thing is created in the future, we can put guardrails on it, which says, look, not your job, not your job. And we don't need an agency whose credibility is being destroyed by its leader. That's what's happened here. So Surgeon General, you're right on. You've just destroyed your own agency. So time to go. Not just the guy, but maybe just the whole agency. The other thing is there's a rash of where maybe people just didn't look at it closely enough in the past, but with the vote by mail stuff that's spread like a kind of like a virus across the country, because it did so on the back of a virus, COVID. They're finding problems with this election system, and that magnifying glass can eventually help correct it. But in Lynchburg, Virginia, a registrar found ballots in a drop box after the primary election, and it's actually 3 weeks. Wait a second here. How many days? They found 20. Okay, it was last week's election, and they found 21 votes sitting in a drop box 3 days after the primary election. Problem is, they don't know when those ballots were put in the drop box. They don't know if it was on election day or after election day. They emptied out the box apparently at some point on Tuesday around midday to prevent it from overfilling. And it wasn't checked again. This is stupid. It wasn't checked again until Friday, 12:15 p.m., 3 days after the primary election.
Right.
So the unknown ballots could have been dropped off anywhere in that time period. Now, there were 3 staff members monitoring the drop box, and they did up until the voting time was supposed to end, and they did not observe any ballots being placed in the drop box. However, this is why it's important. This is actually a primary race between 2 Republicans, GOP congressional candidate John McGuire and Representative Bob Good. Well, it turns out that there's a razor thin margin between these 2 candidates, and it's too close to call. And they just found 21 ballots sitting in a drop box. It's going to go to court. This is sloppy. This is happening. You know, this is happening in Oregon. And I've actually talked to election observers that would follow the people that would empty the box, the election workers that empty the drop box, and take it to elections right after 8 p.m. And there was some uncertainty as to whether those people actually went to elections straight from there.
Well, there was a number of instances this last election season where they had ballots, I think it was in Michigan or something along those lines, that they were out in their car and they were switching them out amongst other people's vehicles before they were headed back to the elections office. And then I remember the person on the news that was talking to an elections office, they said, these election volunteers are not required to go directly back to the office. And it was crazy because the reason why it made the news is because one of these people brought this big old blue bag that said official ballots. into some cafe. And the people working at the cafe thought that that was very unusual. And I want to say, if you see something, say something, everybody. Let us know if you see sketchy stuff like that going on during our election season. But that's one reason why I think that we need to have consistent rules when it comes to election. It needs to be in person. We need to have accountability when it comes to our governance and our in our election process. And if there's a Democrat out there that would be willing to debate me on a fortified, secure voting system, I'm more than happy to. Because if you think that it's going to restrict people from voting, I'm going to say it's only going to restrict people from doing
From cheating.
illegal voting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the RNC's program says they want to make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat. And anybody who disagrees with the latter half of that is really interested in having cheating. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Now, they might deny it's not really happening. But
my question is how do they test it, Kevin? Does the election system, or does Oregon Secretary of State ever put in ghost ballots or something so that they can catch them, so that they know that these are fake ballots and they need to be caught and they need to be? And of course, the answer is we don't know. And the Secretary of State's office, whenever you ask for for an official a request for information, what they'll tell you is we do not discuss the process in that detail because it's basically election security. And I just don't believe that they have any.
So those people are accountable to our elected representatives who must be able to ask that. There's also sunshine laws, which should require that they disclose not the details of every test that they did in terms of what they did and where they did it, but that they did it and how they did it. There is absolutely no justification for covering that up, and except that you want to not be held accountable for what you're doing.
Right.
There's also the case that when you can't audit a system successfully to the people's satisfaction, then you damage the trust in that system. And you don't get it by saying, trust me, just believe me. We don't do that with money. We don't do that with medical care. There's a chain of custody. There's an accounting for how this stuff goes, and you should be held accountable. Now, I would like to see pretty serious criminal penalties and also liability for anybody who decides that they're going to engage in this. You know, if you're going to end up bankrupt and in jail, maybe you won't go and take the ballot bag and hang out at the bar before you head to the elections office. Because if you did that with like gold bars or $100,000 and you're a bonded courier, you're toast. It's over for you. And it should be. But we don't take it that seriously. And we run the system based on, and this is the problem here in Oregon, which is true elsewhere as well. They don't do proactively try to reassure people. They do it. It's a complaint driven system. And so if you can't catch somebody you can't complain about it. And if you can't complain about it, then they'll just claim it's not happening. It's like when the district attorney decides not to charge people that are committing crimes and says, look, crime's going down. It's the same thing. And we have that's actually going on too. And that has to end. If we don't have accountable systems, we don't actually have a system. We just have, it's a system. It's systemic fraud is what's entirely achievable, or it's something just waiting for the moment when somebody figures it out. Now, there's a temp worker in Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix is in Arizona, who was arrested for alleged theft at the Maricopa County Tabulation and Election Center, forcing the county to reprogram its security equipment, which will cost around $20,000. Guy named Walter Ringfeld, 27, who was on probation for a prior felony, was arrested for allegedly stealing a security fob and keys from this center. He was booked on charges of theft and criminal damage. But he's a temporary election worker. That just
How can you
why
work
do
at
we
the
have child rapists go and care for infants too? That's about as smart, and not checking that. And you know what would happen if you did that? You would face criminal and civil liability. The people who authorized it, if your child got raped, that person would face criminal charges for child neglect and abuse for allowing that to happen. And the business or entity that was providing that child care would be sued out of existence, and rightfully so, right? Because it's totally out. These guys, this is the government. Apparently, they don't face any consequences, and they hand the $20,000 bill to us.
And this is the thing is if you tried to get a job as Joe Schmuckatello going in to go work for the post office, I don't think that you can get a job if you've had a felony, right? Like you trying to get a job working within government and you have a criminal record, like especially working for the elections office, that should be a no-go. I mean, that's crazy. I cannot believe that.
Well, believe it, it happened. And the problem is, it suggests that there's a systemic problem, that this is achievable by one person. It can happen on a mass scale and no one would catch it because they didn't have a system in place.
Right.
They didn't have a system in place. And how do we know that? Because they didn't find out this guy was a felon on probation until after he committed a felony stealing access information to the election center. And you know what? I want to know whose known associates are and who he last talked to, and he was calling on his cell phone. And what was he going to do with that fob? You know, it's not like there's a lot of money in an election office. So if he's a criminal, what was he doing stealing this stuff?
Yeah, who was he working for?
Someone?
Yeah.
Did someone promise him payment? You know, that's the thing. You should, and the criminal justice system will go too slow to actually ensure that that election office is secure by the time voting is happening. So they're going to waste another election being failing to secure it. Now, here's a good piece of advice. A Wisconsin Republican who is running against incumbent Tammy Baldwin, Democrat incumbent Tammy. His name is Eric Hovde. He is urging Republicans to vote early this year, which in other states where they don't have vote by mail or where you can't have no excuse absentee ballots, but you can vote early. He's saying vote early because this is it. You got to win, and you can't make it so that our ground game is subject to trying to turn out votes from people who are definitely going to vote when we have to focus on the people who might not vote. And it's a huge cost if people hold their ballots.
And one thing that I would suggest too is get your ballot in first, knock it out as soon as you get it. You know who you're going to vote for already. If you need some help, there's going to be all sorts of there's going to be all sorts of voter guides coming out probably within the next month or two. So look out for those. But at the same time, once you get yours done, you have a responsibility, not only as a Republican or a conservative or a Democrat, but just as an American to go out and say, hey, these people have your values. You should vote. You should vote with your conscience, and these are the people that align with that. And so make sure that you're out there doing your due diligence, because your power as a PCP or a member of a party comes from those individuals that you can influence. And so if you look at the numbers in Oregon, the reason Republicans and conservatives and those right-leaning NAVs, why we haven't won, is because typically our turnout is less than 40%. So time to get off that couch. Let's get a little bit of exercise, go out and knock doors. Let's do what we need to do in order to turn out the vote this year, because it's so crucial this year. I think that you can tell with as much everything that we've faced and just some of the few things that we went over tonight that it's time for a change and it's time for accountability.
Absolutely. And speaking of the consequences of the election. If you're a Jewish American, this might actually be a life and death thing here. This riot that took place in LA,
Mm-hmm.
protest at the synagogue that turned violent, they're raising an alarm about this because this is a lot like the pogroms that took place in Nazi Germany back in the 30s. Back when it was just, these are just random groups doing this, and they go out and they beat the crap out of. Well, where is the Department of Justice right
Where's
now?
the FBI?
Yeah, well, they're part of the Department of Justice, and where is the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division going in and going after these people? Because this is clearly hate crime, intimidation, religious
The
based
Department of Homeland Security, one of their main jobs is terrorism. And whether you're looking at the occupation of the Portland Library at the college here, or you're looking at what just happened, or I think that there was wasn't there a museum in New York City that was also being occupied in the same way? These are our institutions. As Americans, it is ingrained within us to have value for arts and science and libraries. These are things that all Americans love. And they're literally being held hostage by people who are using their political opinion and political objectives in order to use threats of violence against them and the American people, and uh, and a religious minority. This is clear cut anti-Semitism, and it is clear cut. It's clear cut terrorism, and why we're not coming down hard on these people, why we don't know who these people are, is ridiculous. In my opinion, what it shows is it shows that the Department of Justice is either one, colluding with these people, or two, they feel that what these people are doing is perfectly fine.
Well,
It is not. It's not freedom of speech. It is not the freedom to protest when you are destroying property.
Yeah, actually, it's a violation of the rights of the people who are being intimidated and being subject to the violence. And one thing's for sure, I think we're seeing a connection here. These politicized law enforcement agencies that are fighting for and running interference for people like Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and others are also because the real reason why the Democrats don't want to come down too hard on this organized, well-financed syndicate of pro-terrorist protesters committing violence is they're afraid of losing the votes associated with these people, because there's actually only one party that's in jeopardy of losing those votes potentially, and they're in jeopardy of losing them in states where they could actually lose the presidential election in particular, as well as many Senate and House races, if those votes were to not show up for them on election day.
Right.
Well, that's not what we expect a DOJ or an FBI to put into their calculus. But clearly, the fact that they aren't actively busting and dismantling these groups after months and months and months of this activity, money flowing to all of these guys to do this stuff. Because just yesterday, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, said, I want the information about the entities that are financing these protests. I want to know who they are, where they got the money, and how what they're doing with it, because they are clearly engaging in what the same kind of activity that if it were outright terrorism, just explicit terrorism, or if it were organized crime, we'd be busting them. We'd be arresting and busting them. But because they have political favor, they're getting away with it.
And the thing is if you put any hate group in the same position as these individuals, it would have been unacceptable, right? And that's how it's a test. All the secret Democrats out there watching the captive audience show. That's a way that you can test it. Is if the KKK was up there doing that, it would be racist. If you put the Black Panthers up there, it would be racist. And in my opinion, this is very, very racist against our our Jewish friends and neighbors. And I think that this kind of stuff is not acceptable in America. We stand for each other. We, as a community, we protect each other. And I am so sick and tired of this. As a country, we need to root out those people that are trying to divide us upon all of these lines. Those are the people that are truly our adversaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's an example of how it can turn back on the people who just won't get around to doing the enforcement. There's a pro Hamas protester that was plastered um, on a utility box in Bend, Oregon, and then it was vandalized, but it warned Joe Biden, "Come November, we'll remember." And it features Biden in front of names of selected Hamas leaders, and the posters very difficult to remove, but they're apparently being spread around Bend, and it's a warning to Biden that it's part of a buildup where pro-Hamas political supporters are calling for a rally at the Democratic National Convention this August. And they show one of the flyers actually announcing their plans to protest. He's going to wish that he had done something about this sooner and shut these guys down profoundly. But he's allowed this to mushroom into something by pandering to these groups. These groups are going to thank him by rioting.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who the public is going to hold accountable in the presidential election is him. And they should. But, this is what they do. Is terrorists are like, again, like a virus that you got to knock out early, or if it can consume the host. And maybe that's what's happening to the Democrat Party right now. Many of these Democrats in Congress are sitting on the fence. Val Hoyle, the congresswoman in the 4th District, Democrat congresswoman, she voted present when it came time to condemn in a resolution, the rise of anti-Semitism in the country. She's like, well, I don't want to go that far. I'm going to just vote present. And it's that actually lies at the heart of the problem that right now is consuming the Democrat Party. And of course has now apparently warped our law enforcement institutions.
Well, it reminds me of that old quote. They came for the Jews and no one said anything. And then, but I mean, it's really sad that our elected leaders cannot stand up for everyday Americans who just want to live their lives, and they would rather pander to such a small special interest group that is ready to tear us apart. And to be honest, I mean, it is completely unacceptable for these people to be doing what they're doing. And until we have the resolve as Americans to unroot this poisonous plant, I think that the heart and soul of America is going to be twisted up for a long time.
Well, I think Democrats actually have turned their party into just a collection of narrow special interests for which they advocate for. And here's a great example, and we'll wrap up with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon Governor Tina Kotek lays out new nitrate goals amid criticism.
Yeah.
He promises more testing and plans to address nitrate pollution in the lower Umatilla Basin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, nitrate pollution, what she is actually talking about here is she's claiming that people fertilizing things is causing a decline in our water supply. But there's a group called Oregon Rural Action, headed by Kristen Ostrom, and they say there's no substantive action to rein in the sources of pollution. The contamination's getting worse with relative impunity, and there's no indication the governor's letter will change this. Now, we're fortunate that Kate Brown likes to send letters and not accomplish anything. She's really good at that. There is a constant effort, and this is manifests itself also in Lynn County, where they are banning chicken facilities, and they're just these are not being held accountable to science. They're just coming in and making all kinds of claims and then putting pressure as a radical group on elected officials to take action. Where do you remember the extensive hearings in the state legislature discussing what a proper policy formulation would be for this and bringing experts from both sides so we can have a public debate? I don't remember that. Do you?
Nope, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I have to say, this is a very interesting situation because clear out on the eastern side of the state, there was a situation where um, it was a fertilizer company. They spilt a bunch of this fertilizer into the ground, into the groundwater, and it's causing some serious health problems. But government, what they like to do is they like to overreact and they like to give away free money. And so I feel like what Tina is doing is Tina's like, oh yeah, we'll give you free filters and drink some bottled water and call it good. But this doesn't. So one, they're going to overreact because that's what government does, and they're going to say, oh hey farmers, you don't get as much. You don't get as much fertilizer for your farms because this one ag company they burned out the soil and destroyed the groundwater. While on the other side of the fence, it's going to make it harder for farmers to do their jobs. And then two, all of the people that are suffering that are suffering from. I think there were some people that they had stillbirths and things like that because the amount of fertilizer that was in the groundwater, like it's really really bad. And I don't want to overstate that
In that one instance.
at all.
Yeah.
And but it's super interesting though that she realizes that it's really bad and optically it looks really bad, but they're going to overreact and they're going to take away some form of fertilizers from our farmers that are already having a hard enough time. And so ultimately we need to have a balanced approach. We need to protect groundwater in this state, but we also need to protect our farmers' rights and abilities to manage their farms the way that they need to. None of this is good, but in my opinion, the only place that government needs to be is to hold the people accountable that dumped all the fertilizer into the groundwater. It is not to overmanage the farmers, and it is that at the very least, the government did a terrible job protecting groundwater and the drinking water that these farmers and these ranchers and everything depend on out there. And
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, they do have an ulterior motive. They've been trying to force farmers not to use synthetic fertilizer.
yeah,
There's a reason. Synthetic fertilizer is generated using natural gas. That's
yep.
how they create it. And they hate natural gas. As you know, they've been trying to ban it everywhere. And everywhere people notice that they're trying to ban it or the appliances, they push back,
Mhm.
right? Even in liberal places like Eugene, where 70% of the residents are against it and they pushed back and the
Mhm.
city council backed off temporarily.
Yeah.
However, here's the consequence. You know, this problem that suddenly started seeming like it was happening more recently with E. coli showing up in things like lettuce and other vegetables that go to market. Well, first they tried to say it was because um, cattle ranches, that the manure from cattle ranches was leaking into these other
Right.
places and causing it. But that actually turned out not to be the case.
Yeah.
It was because when they told these farmers that you couldn't use synthetic fertilizer anymore, or if you wanted to have a certification as organic, you couldn't
Yeah.
use it anymore. They actually were still fertilizing, but they were fertilizing with the only natural fertilizer that there is, which is manure.
Hmm.
And and it turns out that this was having this knock-on effect of people suddenly getting sick from some vegetable products, raw vegetable products, because of the end of the use of artificial fertilizer. And I talked to this farmer just yesterday, and he's like, yeah, and you can't actually tell the difference between the artificial and the when you test the soil, you can't tell the difference once it's absorbed into the soil between that and the manure, except for one thing. You might get E. coli from the manure. And this is a problem because they're trying to push this all over the world. They're trying to force farmland to out of use. They're trying to, of course, they want to stop cow farts as well, because apparently that's going to end the planet. And
And
there's no proof of that.
and I think that this is super important, and maybe we should do a captive audience just on kind of soil conservation and Republican solutions to it, because all of these systems are intertwined, they're all interlocked, and we can either go with science, go with technology, and go with protecting our environment and our ecosystem, or we can allow government know nothings to try and dictate what we're allowed to do, how we're going to grow it, and how we're going to take care of our government. And what it reminds me of is what's happening in South Africa right now, where they hand off the farms to people who don't know what they're doing, and it's going to cause a famine. Could you imagine a famine in the United States of America?
Yeah.
It could happen. It could absolutely happen.
Yeah.
So don't let the government be the one who dictates what our food is.
Well, and it's not the government, it's actually the extremist groups that control the politicians that control the government. And if we want to have a civilized society, if we want to have food, if we want to have electricity and heat and all that and transportation, we have to have a balanced, sustainable approach to all of this stuff. It has to be based on science at each step of the way, and there has to be a public debate about it. Not some interest group that just starts writing letters to Tina Kotek and showing up at her office and protesting, who gets their way. And yet that's the system we have. So a lot is at stake in this election. And I think it's a time to invalidate the process and the system that's resulted in all of this stuff, turning into a radical transformation of our society, of our food logistics, of our power systems, of our transportation. Well, we're being told what to do by the government. Instead of us actually telling the government what to do, we're just being run around like a bunch of puppets, reacting to it. And you know what? It's cost a lot more money. Inflation has been caused by something. It's not a naturally occurring thing. It is being caused by these politicians who see this to their advantage somehow.
And that's the thing, is we're being attacked on all fronts when it comes to what it means to be an American. Everything from our food to infrastructure, like you said, and everything in between. And as long as we work together, we can overcome this. We can overcome all things. But
as Martin Luther King Jr. said, and the others when they were marching in Selma, we shall overcome.
we shall.
They weren't just talking about racism. They were really talking about a government that gets tyrannical and starts depriving you of your rights. It really doesn't matter what color, ethnicity, religious background you are. There have to be these constraints and controls on government. And so, please, everyone, take the time to share this show with everyone you can. Again, please pray for the Darnells.
Please do.
And also, please pray for our country. It's a great country, but we've actually got to do our part to save it. It's like the Lord gives you a gift, you better use it. And people died for the right for you to be able to do this peacefully through the election process. So get out there, back a candidate, vote, donate, volunteer, and share this show so everyone knows. Thanks again, Stephen, for joining me here. Thank you for representing the young Republicans, because we need this new generation that gets it. And thank you to all of you for watching us here tonight. We will see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Have a great night.